Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, and I'm here with Keith Myers. Keith, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty dang well. It's a lovely summer morning. I've got coffee, and we have Seahawks football to talk about.
Yeah, that's always a good thing. My last couple of days, I've had a new computer that I've been setting up over the last couple of weeks. And last week we had some recording challenges. We overcame that and so forth. I thought I had overcome them to actually record the show normal this morning, and got all set last night. And then this morning I show up and set up the new recording, and it changed some setting that I can't figure out now. And so we're having to kind of backwards record this thing. But here we are. We're ready to go. Talk some Seahawks football. So other than that, though, I'm doing well. The Seahawks seem to be doing well. Today we're going to talk about the secondary, because it's just a brand new shiny object this year compared to last year. And we had some good news this week. Surprising news, Keith. Quinton Dunbar was the prosecutors in Florida decided not to press charges on Quinton Dunbar. He was released from the commissioner's exempt list, and he flew to Seattle yesterday, and he's going to be in Seahawks training camp. Now, we don't know for sure if suspension is down the road, but all things right now point to the fact that he's going to play on the Seattle Seahawks in 2020, which is a game changer.
Yeah, that's, it was one of those things where we thought he was gone, then we thought he was back, then he was gone again. And he was put on this exempt list because basically the commissioner didn't want this constantly being in the news and being what people are talking about rather than actual football. And then suddenly he's back again. And it's good to see from the Seahawks from a football standpoint. Good for Dunbar on a personal note that he won't be facing trial and going to jail, all of that. Hopefully, if he was involved in any way, he learned from this and doesn't do anything like it again. But lack of evidence is what they stated, and so they did not press charges. But they are moving. It
was always kind of weird.
Yeah,
like Baker always seemed to be just a little bit more involved in this thing than Dunbar from the very beginning. Just reading through the tea leaves and kind of the lack of mentions when the articles came out of Dunbar's kind of direct involvement, and then the whole thing with the attorney, but then Dunbar's nowhere to be found. Like in that article where they described the attorney having the meeting at his place to exchange money with Johnson, which is the coach that both Baker and Dunbar knew mutually. Dunbar wasn't there. It seemed like he didn't even know that meeting was going on. Now, that's just me reading into it, but the article didn't mention him at all. It did mention Baker several times as kind of negotiating this thing and coordinating it and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not exactly sure. I think for me, I always held out hope and almost hesitated to kind of comment one way or another on it up until just this week, because it just seemed like something was just a little off. And then, of course, when he got on the exempt list, I went away from it. I mean, after that, and the way things were going in Florida, where they hadn't tried a case for a long time, or all that kind of stuff, it just seemed like they were going to spend the year with no activity on this thing, and he was just going to go into next year, and we would miss out. And all of a sudden, this news came, and it was crazy. I mean, losing your freedom is no joke, and the bonus for us is that he's going to be a Seahawk and he's going to be on the team and participate. But personal level for him, that's got to be just such a huge relief. Hopefully he's going to be able to focus on football and have a great impact on the secondary. And we're going to talk about all of it, how he fits in, how Adams fits, all the other guys. I mean, Keith, on paper, we've got a top 2 or 3 secondary in the NFL, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's suddenly gotten significantly better with trade last week, and then getting one of their starting cornerbacks back off the exempt list this week. Suddenly, it was never really that big of a concern, but now all of a sudden you're like, whoa, okay, this is going to be good, and yeah.
Yeah, we know Pro Football Focus, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but Pro Football Focus had ranked them 5th in the NFL before the Dunbar situation was completely figured out. Like they were giving us that ranking based on the fact that Dunbar probably wasn't going to be on the Seahawks. And now after that, we're loaded.
Mm-hmm.
We just are. All right, before we get into the secondary, let's talk a little bit about what's going on this week. John Ursua, kind of the 5th, 6th wide receiver on the Seahawks last year, test positive for COVID before he tested negative. So we don't know for sure if it's a false positive or a false negative. He's got to have one more test. Don't want to mess around with John's health, but I'm hoping it's negative so he can get back out there. You've got to have 2 negative tests in a row before you can return to team activities.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
It's odd that, it was he tested positive, then he tested negative, and basically we're like, we don't even know if he has it or if it's false or, it's weird, but you know what? Get him in quarantine, get him away from everyone else, so that way the rest of the team can continue to move on safely and follow the protocol. Hopefully the protocol is well developed by the league and actually does protect everybody else. And, it's kind of a test case for the Seahawks. It's their first positive test.
Yeah. Well, and all indications appear to be that the Seahawks really want to take this seriously and are doing everything they can to mitigate the possibility of being contagious. Now, back in the old days, players used to just hold up in hotels during training camp, and you didn't even return home, even if you lived in the same city. And are they going home now, Keith, or is this truly camp and they're staying somewhere where they're not in contact with their family every day?
This is truly camp. This is the training camp part where they're not going back to their families. They have 2.5 weeks of this where it's they're away from their families. It's just team activities. It's just team stuff. So this is the part where if they did a good job of getting everyone into the bubble, that you've actually got a little bit of a bubble, and they'll be able to. So
progress. You're saying trouble could creep up in about 3 weeks' time.
Yeah, that's really what it's going to come down to, is if they when everything's relaxed and they start going home to their families, that also means some of the players, younger guys, will start going out at night, even if they're told that it's
or people around
really
them.
Bad idea. Yeah. And then you have the possibility of someone picking it up. So hopefully that's not the case, but
but it's a big league with lots of players and lots of coaches.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. Now
we have the Eagles head
Keith,
coach.
They're going to cancel college football. Like this is serious. And I've always thought that if there's so much money in the NFL that I thought if there's any possible way that they can do it, they're going to play. And that seems to still be the case. And the NFL, quite frankly, so far has been pretty darn good as far as active COVID cases in the league. And they've done a great job isolating those folks as soon as they're tested that way. So, but boy, this thing really needs to, a lot of luck goes into this season trying to figure it out and navigate it.
Well, I mean, this is one of those things that you and I have been talking about for a couple months now. And what you don't want is a Florida Marlins situation where, they had a couple people that they knew had tested positive, and they ran them out there and played them in a game anyway. And then suddenly their whole roster was testing, and there's exposure of the other team and all of that. Like, we need everybody taking this seriously. Every team. You're going to have a few players here and there that aren't going to follow safety guidelines, and they're still going to go out and do their thing. And hopefully we end up not paying the price for a couple of really bad choices. But overall, like, we need the league in its entirety to be taking this really seriously, or we're going to end up not having football this fall. Maybe we'll have football in the spring, but it won't be this fall.
What do you think about the college football thing?
I think that it's surprising, because you hear all these leagues that are coming around, and they were saying, oh, we're going to do it. We're going to have only conference games and, that kind of stuff. And they were trying to figure out ways to make it work and all of that. And now it looks like it might be shut down just nationally.
Yeah, I heard the Pac-12 is next, like today, with an announcement. It's yeah.
I mean, what you're going to have is this is the best year for the Seahawks to have traded away a first and a third for an all-pro safety, because with no college football season this year, even if it's even if there is college football for part of the nation, but not most of it, or you know what I mean? Like, you still don't have a senior year for all these players. Like, what do? Do those players come back to college and then with another year of
the deal, probably,
and then try and join the NFL, as an older prospect, which we know, tends to not be a good plan for those players, or
if they can get this thing licked, maybe they can do some sort of they'd have to do a major combine this year. I mean, it would have to be probably an expanded version of, some sort of testing or stuff, but you're still not going to get the in-game action and so forth.
Exactly. There's a whole year of development.
It's a horrible situation.
For a lot of players.
I would think that you're going to add a year and of eligibility, and you're just going to have to be what it is. Yeah, it's just going to have to be what it is.
So next year's draft class is going to be empty, because basically you've got
juniors that played that you have tape on, and that's it.
Yeah, you'll have a few star players that.
Do you think they take the draft from 7 rounds to like 4?
Oh, they'll have to.
That'd be crazy. I mean, oh my goodness. Look what they did. I mean, the ramifications of all this is just nuts.
Look at what they did in baseball, right? The baseball draft is like 187 rounds, or okay, it's not that bad, but it is like it is like 8,
it's 70 some odd rounds.
Yeah, it's almost 80 rounds. And they did 5 this year. They had a 5-round draft. And you're going to see something really similar happen in football, because there won't have been college football. You'll be drafting people who haven't played in a year and a half. There's an entire lost year of development and tape and all of that. Like I said, you'll have a few star players that have been just dying for their eligibility for the draft to come around, that will come in, and teams will be going in and doing what they need to draft those guys. And then you'll have a bunch of people who, they had just lost their starting job on their college team, and so they entered the draft because why not? Their draft stock's not going to get any higher. And so it's going to be a kind of a bimodal draft in that way. And it's just going to be weird. And so for the Seahawks to have basically punted on, a lot of the 2021 draft, I'm kind of okay with.
Well, it turns out pretty good in that respect. Now, when you take a look at it just from a human condition sort of situation, I understand why colleges are hesitant to put all their not only their players but students and faculty, coaches at risk. Controlling behavior at the NFL level is hard enough, or NBA, Major League Baseball, etc. but to expect 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, freshly turned 21-year-olds to behave in a certain way over massive leagues. We're talking way, way more players than the NFL has. So it's just one of those deals where it's not even about football at the college level so much. It is that it's about the students.
Oh, absolutely. And so you have all of these colleges that are closing. They're closing their campus to students because it's not safe. But then you're going to expect the football players to come in and practice and do all the normal stuff, but none of the other students are there. Like, you're just talking about like opening up liability and all this other stuff.
Yeah. It's not conducive. It's just not happening. Mm-hmm. We didn't set ourselves up well enough to control this thing to play football. Now, the NFL is different because it's a paid league with lots of money, and it's a slightly better controlled situation. It's not optimal, but it's better. And so they're going to give it a go. But are they going to play a complete season this year? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, we'll see.
They're talking about the resurgence of COVID and the second wave, all this kind of stuff. So we just don't know. But for right now, here we are. We're in training camp. Things are happening. It looks like we'll at least get to, the 13th of September and kick off the NFL. Let's talk about the Seahawks. So the Seahawks this week cut Brian Allen and Anthony Jones. Brian Allen's a cornerback that was on the practice squad, got back an invitation. Nice size guy. I talked about him earlier a few shows ago that I thought maybe Brian Allen would have the inside track to get that fifth corner spot because he's got great size, a 5th round pick in 2017. So he's got some experience hanging around. 6'3", 215, ran a 4.48 40, 34-inch arms and 10-inch hands. I mean, this guy's a big guy. It's almost as if he could play safety, but they decided to cut him. Now, it doesn't mean he won't come back. They make these moves all the time. And they also cut Anthony Jones, a running back. And they're down to 77 with John Ursula currently off the roster. It makes you question whether or not they're holding open two roster spots for 2 players.
Yeah, this is weird because typically in a training camp situation, if they drop someone, they have someone else on the roster.
They backfill right away
within seconds because they want the full 90 out there at practice every day. And this year it's 80 because of the COVID rules. But for them to have open roster spots for more than a few minutes is weird.
Yes.
So it does make me wonder if, they don't have someone else in mind. Like they're not doing this because they've got someone that they're in the process of trying to get a physical for.
Right. It wouldn't surprise me if we haven't announced it by the end of the day because full practices begin tomorrow. So full no pad practices begin tomorrow at camp. And so, You'll likely see some activity today to get a body in. Now they've got to go through testing before they can get to the field. But
so we won't see them on the field for a while.
Yeah.
It's also
wanted to point out too that the practices are starting to live stream tomorrow.
I know.
So I think they're doing like 10 or 12 or 15 days of live streaming on Seahawks.com. So make sure you check that out.
Yeah, we thought last week we talked about not knowing what they were going to do with the streaming.
Exactly.
And then this year, because you can't go out, you can't go there, you can't sit on the berm in the sun and watch practice or any of that stuff. So for the live stream is going to be real important for fans to kind of just be able to see what's going on and really get a taste for this year's team. And so it is kind of cool to see that they're bringing it back. Now, hopefully they're bringing it back in a format that allows us to actually watch practice and not have practice going on behind people who are talking. But yeah, I mean, it will be nice too.
It's better than nothing. I'll take the talking this year as long as I can see stuff going on in the background. I would normally not, but I'm so desperate right now for some semblance of normal in football and stuff.
Yeah.
I'll take Jen Mueller talking for 10 minutes about, cooking and what, Marcus Trufant did back, 15 years ago. That's fine. But I want to be able to see my guys, my DK Metcalfs, my Adams with the 33 number jersey on. I want to see what Collier looks like this year. Does he lean down? Is he beefed up to move inside a little bit? I want to kind of see what's going on. So, yesterday I saw that ESPN ranked the Seattle linebacker group as number 1 in the NFL. That's really no surprise, but it's kind of a nice thing to have. And you combine that with the secondary, things are looking pretty decent. And maybe they're holding that roster spot open or 2 spots for the defensive line. And all of a sudden, dude, say we add Griffin and maybe an interior defensive tackle, or maybe just Griffin, and they expect Collier and Green to slide inside. I'd totally be okay with that. Mm-hmm. And that would be a home run for me on an off season that took a long time to develop. But if it happened, we are seriously in the Super Bowl talk.
Well, if you add a couple defensive linemen, the defense would then be Super Bowl ready, because we know that the linebackers are ready. And we're going to talk today about the secondary and how ready it is. These are the back 7 of this defense is absolutely elite on a talent level.
I'm going to say overall, it's probably the best we've ever had,
except for
under Pete Carroll,
except for 2013.
Even when you combine all the depth talent as well.
Oh yeah.
So starting level we'll talk about it, but starting level talent, you've still got Bobby Wagner, you've still got KJ Wright, and then you're adding Jordan Brooks, a number 1 draft pick.
True.
And then you've got Irvin back. and then you've got Cody Barton that's probably going to wither on the vine this year, but he's one of probably the best reserve linebackers we've had in 10 years. Right? Because we hadn't had great reserve linebackers for a while. So our reserve linebackers are pretty choice this year.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you look at the secondary. Now we had Thomas, we had Chancellor, we had
Richard Sherman,
Maxwell, Browner, whatever, right? That group, right? That's a good group. That's a great group. That's a historically good group.
You've got 3 first ballot Hall of Famers in that group.
3 first ballot Hall of Famers, but check this out. So you got Adams. He's probably destined for that.
He's at least playing at an all-pro level early in his career.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then you've got Dunbar, who's a Pro Bowler. Then you've got
Griffin who's a Pro Bowler. You got, yep.
Right. So there's 3 Pro Bowlers on the back end. Plus you've got Diggs, who's an alternate Pro Bowler last year. So you got 4 Pro Bowlers four starting Pro Bowlers in the secondary.
True.
Now,
but
go back and look at
But if you go back to 2013, you've got 3 first ballot Hall of Famers.
Yes.
In the secondary.
So you're saying that trumps Pro Bowlers?
Absolutely.
You're right. No, you're right. But what I'm saying is we're having a conversation around that. We're in the conversation now. Obviously, this is on paper, and we have to go out and actually play. Mm-hmm. But this group has the potential to be, I'll just say it, the second best overall back 7 that the Seahawks have had under Pete Carroll, and quite frankly, probably in the Seahawks history.
Yeah, and it's deeper. So when you looked at the 2013, 2014 years in there, the Seahawks were really, really dang good at every level.
And we stayed healthy.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to use our depth, that year.
Well, and then in 2014, we kind of did, because at the end of the year, you had all these guys that were banged up. And they went out and played, and they, were given everything for the team trying to, win that second Super Bowl. but they were kind of banged up, and there wasn't depth behind them, and that was a concern. But this year's group, okay, you don't have all of the first ballot Hall of Famers in the secondary, but you do have Pro Bowl level talent, and you've got good players behind them. I mean, when you look at, you went through that list. Who is the Marquise Blair back in 2013, 2014? The rook, or I guess he's now a second-year player who was impressive when he got on the field and looked like a surefire starter that now is no longer, he has to fight just to see the field. Where was the guys like,
it's pretty exciting,
like Trey Flowers and Ugo Amadi?
Exactly, Keith. That's what I'm talking about. Overall, this is,
I like the depth.
The one of the best units that the Seahawks have ever fielded.
I really like the depth. I really like the depth at linebacker because somehow in there you've got Irvin and Barton. That we've got to find a spot for them on the field. The other three guys
normally
are
they
play.
could start. They could start for half the league. There's just no question.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you add Shaquem Griffin in there and Burke Irvin. Burke Irvin was an excellent linebacker. Now I know he's undersized in the NFL, but in college football he was very productive and very instinctual. He's just 6 foot and 230, so you got to figure out what his fit is. Now the same thing can be said for Griffin as well, 6 foot 227, but he's got elite speed. So
elite speed, elite strength for that position.
I think they cut Burke Irvin this year and probably put him on the practice squad, to be honest. The practice squad went to 15 players, and you can have guys that were on your active roster onto the practice squad this year. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But there's only so much room, and we're going to talk about a ton of guys today, especially on the secondary. We're talking about linebackers right now, but you could, if you went and kept Griffin, you're going to keep 6 linebackers, and that's. If you're going to keep 6, you've got to find another place where you're only going to keep, instead of 10 linemen, you're going to keep 9. And, in the secondary, you might have to make a choice on a cornerback situation. Typically
teams, the general rule is you go 9, 6, 10, right? So you have 6 linebackers, and then you have either 9 up front and 10 in the back, or 9 in the back and 10 up front. That's kind of the kind of what everybody does. Sometimes you'll see teams keep 5 linebackers in order to go 10-10, but that's always temporary because a linebacker gets hurt. I mean, they hit a lot of, and somebody will get banged up and whatever, and then you got to get bodies in. And
well, there's the value of having Green and Collier on the roster on the defensive line, because you can slide those guys inside and maybe get away with 1 less. So you have 9 linemen.
Yeah. Well, and it's also one of the situations where you have Irvin, who is exactly. He's going to count as a linebacker and be the 6th linebacker perhaps, but he's also a defensive end, and so you can move him around, and you can move Collier and Green inside on passing downs, and so you can maybe get away with one less defensive tackle on the roster, and that kind of like flexibility to move guys around is useful when trying to put the roster together at the end of training camp and preseason, and cut 90 down to 53. Now this year it's 80 down to 53, but it's still down to 53. I mean, that's the key part. You got to get your team set, and it's never easy. There's always players you want to keep that you have to let go.
So let's talk players. So let's move to our main conversation in the secondary, Keith. Let's go through it just and try to figure out like how it's going to all fit together, because it's going to be pretty amazing to watch. And I'm so excited, especially you mentioned Marquise Blair. Let's start with the safeties. So Marquise Blair, you could argue deserved maybe a chance to have a real shot at starting this year, if not for the quality of the starters in front of him. But at 6'2", 205, we all saw a little bit of promise last year. Now, sure, he was out of place a little bit. And quite frankly, there were situations in our secondary last year that it just wasn't quite right. And so you just don't know exactly what was going on with like a Marquise Blair or a Mahdi, why they didn't quite get the opportunities that maybe we thought they should get. And they didn't play as much. And when they did play, they seemed maybe just a little out of step or lost or hesitating a little bit. And so it'll be interesting to see if a guy like Marquise Blair with an entire offseason in the playbook, watching film, can come in and just be ready to be a competent player who's got that playbook completely under control and goes out and actually plays without thinking and is very instinctive, because I know in college he was a very instinctive player, a ball hawk kind of guy, a guy that's always around the ball. And if he can turn into that for the Seahawks, even if it's in a reserve role, there might not even be a step back when he gets out there to play. He's such a playmaker. Mm-hmm. And he has the playing flexibility to play in the box. And he's got the long speed to play deep, and so he gives you that flexibility like an Adams does, like a Diggs does. You know, Diggs can play a little bit of box for you, but he's going to be in the back end this year. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, at the time, you know, when I was really looking at Marquise Blair this offseason, I was thinking that eventually he would take over for Bradley McDougald, just because I just thought there's just more upside. I like Bradley McDougald, but you know what? He was just a good, steady pro. He wasn't the guy that was like lightning in a bottle and making plays all over the field and stuff.
And Blair can be. I mean, he was out of position a couple times or whatever. He did rookie things as a rookie, but he also did really promising things that we say basically he flashed, and he looked outstanding. And for him to not get on the field more after those couple of starts when he played really well was very confusing. And I know that, you know, I think the team thought they were a contender, and they didn't want you know, those kind of rookie growing pains to cost the team.
But in week 7 and 8, he had 17 tackles, 12 solo, mm-hmm. 1 pass breakup, and a forced fumble. You know, he looked like he deserved an opportunity, and they took it away.
Yeah.
And I agree. They did that because they were at that point in the season. I think they were like 7-1 or 8-1 or something.
And they ran it out to, it was 11-1, wasn't it? Or no, it was when they beat San Francisco.
10-2 when they beat San Francisco the first time, I thought it was 8-1.
Maybe that's what it was. They put these wins together, and it looked like, hey, this is a great team. And I mean, there were signs that it was, you know, they were a little bit of a paper tiger.
They were winning by 1 point here and there.
Yeah. You know, so there were right. There were signs of that, but it was, you know, the win-loss record. So if you were in the room with the team, like, you could not have convinced them they weren't a contender. And so I can kind of see, like, you know, get the veterans back out there, get the people that you've won with. But this was a great looking player who didn't get the field because the team was afraid of rookie mistakes. And sometimes you just got to play the rookies and let them grow, let them learn through it. And, you know, now we've got a situation where Blair is the third safety again. Granted, it's a massive upgrade from McDougald to Adams in front of him, but, you know, Blair's going to have to fight to see the field.
Yeah. And I think it's a good thing, you know, that he's there. Now Diggs is contractually with the Seahawks for another, I think it's 2 years. Mm-hmm. And then Marquise Blair will be on a contract year the following year as well. So it'll be interesting to see if he can push through that. Now, I don't anticipate him replacing Diggs at this point. In fact, it could be used as a hedge with the Diggs contract in the future. But it also could be a situation where Marquise Blair ends up being a trade value piece for the Seahawks. And I hate to say that because I would love to see the young guy be able to get an opportunity, but it may be an injury situation where he gets an opportunity, or it could be another team. Mm-hmm. We just don't know at this point.
Or it could just be that they're going to get him an opportunity not as a starter, but as in a big nickel situation where you have three.
Well, and that's what Pete Carroll talked about.
Yeah, where you have three safeties on the field, especially when one of them is Adams, who can play linebacker, he can play slot corner, he can come up and rush the passer, he can do anything. And so to have him on the field and have Blair out there, you just have a lot more speed, a lot more flexibility. You could do really anything out of that formation. And so just to have, that kind of option, I could see Blair getting a reasonable amount of playing time as a big nickel this year.
Well, do you think that he would have to fight Ugo Amadi for playing time in that situation? Now, you said big nickel. What about Ugo Amadi playing in the slot as a third cornerback in certain situations? And do they end up competing against each other for playing time?
Yes, they do. Because Ugo Amadi is a slot corner. He's the small nickel, where Marquise Blair is the big nickel. And so then it's
5'9", 201 pounds, ran a 4.5 140, but plays quicker.
Plays much quicker than that. And is a natural ball hawk himself. And
do you know that Ugo Amadi only had 76 defensive snaps in 2020?
Yeah, it
seemed like he played more, but most of his playing time came on special teams.
Yeah, he was a special teams mainstay, kind of a special team star. Looked really good in that role. Didn't get on the field as a and actually any playing time till like the last couple weeks. He was a complete non-factor at cornerback. Because they kept playing Jamal Adams. No, that's not the right word. Jamal Taylor, who was terrible at the slot corner spot, and then they cut him, and they go, yeah, we're gonna give Ugo Amadi a shot, and then Amadi didn't play, and instead it was King who got all the playing time in the nickel, and King's gone now, and Amadi didn't get in until right at the end of the year, and Pete Carroll was like, oh yeah, we probably should have played him more. He looked really good. Well, yeah, you think?
Well, in his last 3 games, he played nickel corner and had 55 snaps, 5 tackles, and an interception after not seeing a single defensive snap between week 3 and week 14.
Yeah.
So, he was a gunner on punt coverage and stuff, and I think that's where we saw him a lot.
Yep.
But it'd be interesting. It'd be very interesting because I think in the offseason, the assumption was that he would get the shot at starting in the nickel spot. And I think that still remains true, but we haven't heard a word about Ugo Amadi in the offseason, like what he's doing, where he's at, where his head's at. If Pete Carroll still feels the same way. I know that they've got a couple kids on the roster to compete there, including Linda Stevens at corner. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but it'll be very interesting to see if they bring another nickel guy, camp casualty type guy in later on to compete.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
the roster seems built right now, but nonetheless,
the roster in the secondary does feel built.
But what about the nickel spot? Do you feel good right now going into the season with Ugo Amadi as your starter with no real backup there other than Adams can play in the slot occasionally, Diggs can play in the slot?
Because that's what's going to happen is you're going to see Amadi as the slot corner. You're going to see you've got Adams and Diggs who can both cover in the slot. And you've got Blair there to pick up, the slack at safety. And so you're going to see situations where you've got Adams lining up as a slot corner and Blair at strong safety. You're going to see situations where Blair rotates back and Diggs rotates outside in the slot. And quite frankly, you're going to see situations where if they have to, they bring Trey Flowers back in on the outside, and you allow someone like Shaq Griffin to slide inside and cover the shiftier corners on the inside and let Flowers play where he's got a boundary to help protect him. And I mean, that's the kind of situation that there's just a lot of flexibility there. And I don't see a reason at this point why they wouldn't just roll with what they've got. I mean, if a really good slot corner, let's say Justin Coleman, ends up available because of a cap reason and wants to come back and will come back on a, because he's cut at the end of the year, it becomes a league minimum kind of situation. Go bring Justin Coleman back. I mean, he's one of the best slot corners in the league. But they're going to have, you're going to have a situation like that for them to go up and really shake up the defensive rotation, I think, at least on the back end. The front, at defensive line, they're still looking to add bodies, but I think they're set in the secondary.
So let's start talking about the free safety spot in Diggs being the starter for a full year, Keith. Last year we had him for 5 games, huge impact. I think everybody's really excited about the impact that Diggs is going to have as a full-time starter, and you pair that with newly acquired Jamal Adams. That safety tandem for the Seahawks is second only to Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor in the way that it affects the entire defense. How do you feel about Diggs and then having Marquise Blair as the backup there, obviously, and going into a season and hopefully getting a full season out of Diggs?
Man, if we get a full season out, 16 games out of Diggs, that would be phenomenal because, I mean, you look at the impact that he made last year. When he played, this defense was significantly better with him than without him. And, even like guys like Trey Flowers, who struggled last year, played significantly better in the games with Diggs in the back than he did when it was, Tedrick Thompson. So I think that you're in a situation where it's going to be, it's such a lift to have a guy on the back end that everybody trusts, that plays at a Pro Bowl level, and allows them to go to that, cover 3 scheme with a single high safety back there and not have to drop your strong safety back into the back end, which the Seahawks had to do in the games without Diggs last year. And so they played a lot of cover 2 where McDougal was also bailing and, ending up in the back end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in order to have, now they can have that single high safety that they trust back there by himself, who can cover all the ground that needs covered and do all those things. And it allows them to use Adams as Adams and to have him be everywhere, be up at the line of scrimmage, to be, at the linebacker depth, to, move outside and cover a corner or, because then because Adams is so good at coverage and things, he can cover a wide receiver and you can run a corner blitz, and do those kind of things. Like you can do all these kind of cool, different wrinkles and everything because you've got a guy in the back that everybody trusts and a guy in front of him at strong safety who can do anything and everything. And so I think it's just a cool, combination to have, but they just haven't had a guy like Diggs since Earl Thomas. And even with Earl Thomas, the last 2 years of Earl Thomas both ended in a broken leg and Tedrick Thompson. And, that was, so we've had a couple years with, with Tedrick now and they were a failure, and they brought Diggs.
That was
in,
so hard to watch. I'm still confounded
better.
How we stuck with him for so long. I love Pete, but it was a detriment to the entire defense when Tedrick Thompson was on the field, and week after week, failure after failure, Pete would come to Tedrick's rescue during the press conference, and I'm just wondering why you think that happened. Why we went with Jamar Taylor for a while. Why did we make those mistakes and continue to run those guys out onto the field? And obviously they learned from that. They have Diggs and Adams at this point. I think they saw that they needed to spend the money at those spots. That's the only thing I can come up with. I just don't understand myself, especially given the characterization and the reputation that Pete Carroll has as a secondary guy.
Well, there's a couple different parts of it. Is one, that Tedrick Thompson has basically what we found out is that during practice he would go out and he would look like Earl Thomas. I mean, he's got elite speed and was all over the place and whatever. And then he'd get out there in games and, be like a completely different guy and not in a good way. I mean, basically he was the inverse Dave Craig. This is going back a little bit, but Dave
That's
Craig
funny.
was really not a practice player and had a hard time beating out Jim Zorn and actually getting on the field. Because he even had the starting job and then lost it back to Zorn and then got it back. You look at that transition. It was because Craig was terrible at practice, but he'd get out and on game day and perform.
He was a gamer.
Yeah, and Tedrick was kind of the opposite. He was a guy who looked really good in practice and just never put it together on the field. And maybe it was a confidence issue, or maybe it was just when it's actually live action and it's at full speed and there's hitting involved and whatever, he just doesn't show as well. And so that really was part of it. I don't blame Pete Carroll for coming to his defense because that's what Pete Carroll does. Find me a time when a player performed poorly that Pete Carroll came out and said, oh yeah, they were awful. No, he doesn't do that. He stands up for his guys. It's why everyone loves him. It's why players want to play for him, because he will go to bat for his guys. And so, of course, he would come out, he would say whatever he needed to do to try and protect Tedrick Thompson. But that doesn't mean that in the meeting rooms, that, when they look at film in the safety room, that Tedrick wasn't getting roasted. They're not going to do it publicly. And I think that's to Pete Carroll's credit. I know everyone would love,
too.
I know everyone would love for him to just be honest and be like, yeah, that was awful. We need to, we're going to go trade for Quandre Diggs and fix that. But you're not going to get that. I mean, there are other coaches that will do that, and players typically try and get away from those teams. And players want to come to Seattle. And I think that's a good part of why. So, and then a part of the other thing is that, they had Hill also, who is a natural strong safety, but could play free safety and everything. And they really wanted to get him on the field, and he could not stay healthy. When he was out there, he was better than Thompson, but he just couldn't stay healthy. He would, play pretty well for half a game and then get banged up, and it just never really worked out. I think he's still on the roster.
He is still on the roster. In fact, he's the primary backup to Jamal Adams right now. I was going to ask you about how you felt with Lano Hill. He's coming into his fourth year and has yet to really make an impact on this team. And you pointed to the reason why. Yeah,
and so he's a guy with talent, and when he got on the field, a lot of times it was out of position. It was on the back end. It was at free safety, but he was better than Tedrick Thompson. He just would then turn around and get hurt, and Tedrick would have to come back in, and that just was a situation that it just kept becoming a problem. And yes, he's listed as the primary backup to Jamal Adams, but you and I both know that the primary backup to Jamal Adams right now is Marquise Blair.
Yeah, because Marquise Blair can play both.
He can, and in fact, he was he's a strong safety mentally, and that's when he came into the league. And the team's like, no, he's going to be a hybrid, so they had him in both roles. And then basically, there was a point in the season where they're like, no, we're committing him just to free safety. And I think because they wanted to get him ready, because they knew the Tedrick Thompson situation was a mess. But then they traded for Diggs, and they're like, oh, well, we traded for Diggs, so now Blair's going back to the hybrid safety role where he can do both. And so, but they were prepping Blair to take over for Tedrick there for a while. And,
Yes.
I wish they had done that sooner.
I do too. So let's talk about Jamal Adams. I mean, we have to kind of, because he's new to the team and we don't really know what kind of impact he might have. Wrong. We know exactly what he's going to do for this defense, but let's talk about him because he's the fun new toy on the defense that we have been missing for a while. What does he do for everyone else on this defense that we've been missing? And when you pair him with Diggs and you look at the secondary overall, talk to me about the impact that Jamal Adams has on the Seahawks in 2020.
Well, schematically, Adams can do everything. He can literally do everything. He can play linebacker. He can set the edge. He can cover a slot. He can cover on the outside. He can come up and be an enforcer. He can line up at defensive end and rush the passer. I mean, he can do anything for you. And having Diggs on the back end, who everybody trusts, allows you to use Adams to his fullest extent. He will be the strong safety from a personnel standpoint, but schematically, he might line up in those other positions. Now he'll still be the strong safety, but he's not playing, where you traditionally have a strong safety stand.
So he gives us the maximum roster flexibility that we can possibly have.
Yeah. And so, and you can't really take advantage of that if you don't have a guy like Diggs in the back, because look what they had to do with McDougald. They had to rotate him back and play cover 2. Are you really playing cover 2 with Adams as your strong safety and having him, cover a deep half the field?
I think they will, only for scheme diversity reasons, personnel matchups and so forth.
I think they will, on occasion.
And then they go into a zone situation.
They'll keep teams honest.
Right.
Where they can't be like, okay, we just assume that it's a cover 1. And so if we get the ball on the boundary outside that, maybe Diggs can't get all the way over to the sidelines.
Well, Jamal Adams gives you an opportunity to play a lot more man than you used to play because, and with Quandre Diggs. So to me, we were talking about Quinton Dunbar, and we'll get to those guys in just a second, the cornerback group. But a guy like Trey Flowers is a much better man cover guy than he is in a zone. And so there is some upside promise for Trey Flowers to me. I thought even with Dunbar out, Trey would maybe turn into a better corner this year just because of the safety group. But now coming into kind of a reserve role possibly, or a boundary corner, and they move Dunbar inside into the slot. There's a lot of options right now for the Seahawks, but Jamal Adams is kind of the key cog that kind of puts that together. And also, Keith, speak to what Jamal Adams brings to the Seahawks as far as a character, a guy that's a leadership guy to the team that maybe we've been missing for a while.
Well, I mean, he was unquestionably the leader of the Jets defense, not just from a performance and talent standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint. You could watch those games and other defenders would feed off his energy, and he would get in someone's face if they, started freelancing and weren't doing their job. And he held other people accountable, but he was that big emotional leader, that huge personality that really every defense needs, because defense is so much of an emotional. You have to go up and hit people, and some of that you just have to have that, like, you'd be jacked.
That's why I was so excited for Marquise Blair last year when he had those 2 impactful games. I was like, this is what the defense is missing. And then they took him out of it, and I was like, man, we could use that.
So it's not that the Seahawks didn't have leadership. I mean, they had Bobby Wagner, who's an All-Pro, and KJ Wright's out there too, and
Bradley McDougald was a quality guy.
True, but they were all the same kind of leader, and it's different because they're quiet leaders, right? They're quiet performers. They aren't going to go get in someone's face. They don't jump up and down and scream and really get other people fired up the same way Cam Chancellor did. He was the absolute emotional leader of the Seahawks when he was here. When he got hurt and left, Earl Thomas stepped into that role and did it well until he got hurt. Up front, you had Michael Bennett who would do that, and Richard Sherman.
Well, I was just going to say, last year though we had Clowney, but I didn't really see a lot of emotion out of Clowney either. He occasionally when he made big plays, but in between he was fairly innocuous, I thought.
Yeah, I mean he was a little bit of that, but he just didn't have that same consistent energy that everyone else can feed off of, the same way that like Cam Chancellor did. And it's something that this defense lacked, because you have to have both. You've got to have, the quiet leaders that's going to pull someone aside on the sidelines and talk them up, or if they're getting too jacked up the way, you'd see sometimes like Richard Sherman do it his rookie and second year. And someone would, pull him over to the sideline and calm him down and get him, get his head back right and that kind of stuff. You've got to have those quiet leaders that can do that, but you also need those emotional leaders that can get everyone up, that can, if you give up a big play and whatever, that can, get everyone ready and focused and being aggressive again the next time out. And they kind of lacked that. And that's the kind of player, that's the kind of person that Adams is he's a guy, he's an emotional leader. He's a big, demonstrative, guy that other people can look at. Yeah.
He's going to get out there and fire people up.
He's got that energy that defenses need, and that the teams kind of lacked. And I think that it's such a good pickup from that point of view, and that it's going to make other people better just by having him out there, not just from a talent perspective, but just from an energy perspective.
So let's go to the cornerback room. Right now, after we cut Brian Allen, which we talked about earlier, the Seahawks have 10 corners on the roster currently, which is crazy. But let's start at the top. We've got Quinton Dunbar, we've talked about, and then Quill Griffin and Trey Flowers, and then Ugo Amadi kind of comes over and plays in the nickel. That's the base group on the corner room. And then we've got some guys vying for the fifth spot, or a special teams, guru like Nico Thorpe. But they've also got guys like Lyndon Stevens there, a guy that ran a 4.38 40, 6 foot, 193, pretty decent size for a slot corner. And then they've got a big corner in Ryan Neal, 6'3", 200 pounds, ran a 4.4 40. He's got a really nice athletic profile. And then Jason Stanley was a college wide receiver from Georgia originally, went into the camp, I think, with Atlanta. And 6'2", 207, 33-inch arms, 35 vertical, 80-inch wingspan, 4.37 40. He's a gunner. He's kind of a special teams guy as well. So it's interesting. I think maybe that Nico Thorpe role might be in jeopardy for Nico Thorpe this year, based on the fact that Nico is coming off an injury. He's getting older. His contract's elevated now for a minimum vet guy, and maybe a young guy can come in and develop a little bit more into an actual cornerback for the team, as well as a special teams contributor. How do you see the cornerbacks group this year, Keith, when it's all stacked up?
So I kind of agree with you. I have been hesitant to put Nico Thorpe on the bubble because he's actually a captain. He's the special teams captain for this team and has been for the last couple of years. But when he was out last year, did the special teams get significantly worse without him? And I don't think so, because what you saw was the development of Ugo Amadi and Shaquem Griffin as the two gunners, as the stars on, special teams. And both of those guys did really well in that role. They were very good players. And, Keem is a guy that has, some of those leadership talents that would allow him to be a special teams captain. And so I think that you're in a situation where you can go with the younger guys. And the guy they brought in from Atlanta, who was the wide receiver, he is
Jason Stanley.
Stanley, that's right. He is really intriguing to me because, first of all, he was learning corner from scratch because he was a wide receiver. And so there's a little bit of you can't expect a guy to make that switch instantly, but he was learning it in Atlanta where they play a very similar defense because that's Dan Quinn's team, right? Dan Quinn was Seattle's defensive coordinator before he went to Atlanta to become a head coach. So they play a very similar scheme, and that's what he's been learning. He's been learning that from the beginning. He is got tremendous speed. He's been a standout special teams guy, but there's a lot of upside. His ability to continue to improve, to continue to learn the position, and eventually, become a competent player at cornerback is something that Nico Thorpe doesn't offer you. Because
yes, and we've talked about that for a while now. Like, what do you do with that fifth corner spot? Do you develop a guy? Now, this could be the difference. To me, this is the absolute difference maker comment right here. Quinton Dunbar and Quill Griffin are both on contract years. We need to have a hedge on the roster. We just do. Because it's possible one of those guys doesn't come back. Likely Dunbar. Out of the two. And so, we do have Trey Flowers, but he's in year 3. So the following year would be his contract year. So it'd be nice. It'd be really nice to develop one of Ryan Neal or Jason Stanley or another guy like that on the roster. That could be an outside corner in development guy.
Yeah. And that's the situation where they do need to look ahead and not have every cornerback be in a contract year, because then you go into the next offseason and all of a sudden the cupboard's bare and you don't want to be in that situation. So ultimately they need to get one of their 2 starters signed. And so we may see that at some point during the season is you see a probably
it'd be nice before camp broke if it was Griffin.
Yeah, and get Quill Griffin signed to a long-term extension just to provide some stability, and then also to go in and get and have a guy like Stanley who you believe that he is athletically there and mentally he's getting around to it, and that he can become a good player. Because I know I brought this up on the show before, but this is Byron Maxwell. This was a guy who wasn't even a starting cornerback in college. He was a special teams player mostly in college, who had the athletic traits that you could see he could develop into a good corner, but they were drafting a special teams player, and they drafted him, and they, it took 3 years, but eventually he got his chance to play and, proved that he could do it, and then signed a real big contract and left the Seahawks once his rookie year was done, or rookie deal was done. But the team has developed corners like that in the past, and this is it's a very similar kind of situation where you've got a guy that just needs to learn the position.
Nice. So, how do you think it all works together? Like the defense, I noticed that The Atlantic had their defensive rankings published this week. Seahawks last year finished 15th in pass defense, DVOA, and 26th in rush defense, DVOA, 18th overall. The Atlantic ranks us this year 14th. If you really think about it, and what I talked about earlier this offseason, I think you did too, was that if they could get into the top 15 conversation, we could be a competent enough defense where our offense, being top 5-ish, could get us to the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And I still kind of feel that way, but I think that 14th overall, now with Dunbar in the fold, and maybe we add that final piece on the defensive line, pushes us into the top 10 defensive conversation. And I just kind of want to figure out where you're at on the spectrum when you put it all together.
Well, one of the things that we look at is this is one of the top secondaries in the NFL. We have ESPN ranked the linebacking group as the top linebacking group in the NFL. The back 7 is Super Bowl ready. What's the front 4 going to do? And even if the front 4 is mediocre and not great, the back 7 is so good it's still going to be a good defense. And because when we talked about before, like, oh, well, if they can get up into the 15th range, and in that was when there was no Dunbar and no Adams on the back end.
Absolutely.
That was before we really got a great look at Brooks at linebacker. And it's just one of those situations where we were like, okay, there's some pieces, but there's some holes. We'll see. And now you look at the back seven, and the back seven is set. And it's solid. It's really good. And what can we get out of the defensive line? If we can get more out of the defensive line than we got out of him last year, this defense can be pretty dang good. It's not going to be like 2013, best team, where they were the best defense in the league by a wide margin kind of situation, but because the defensive line isn't as dominant, but they're close. They're close to that. If Clowney decides to come in and re-sign for 1 year, $10-12 million just to get on a roster and play, then that is a type of situation where, okay, now this defense is suddenly really good, especially if they can add a rotational defensive tackle, someone Al Woods-ish.
So would it be more important for the team to add a speed edge Leo type guy like Everson Griffin, or a edge setting guy like Clowney, where we've already got Rasheem Green and Collier over there? And then on the other side, we've got Mayoa and Taylor, an unproven rookie.
And Irvin. And
right. Oh, I mean, I know we've got a lot of rotation pieces, right? Alton Robinson. I know we've got a lot of rotation guys, but what is now more important to make the defensive line complete? A guy like Griffin or a guy like Clowney? Is going to be more expensive than Griffin, by the way.
True. I would say if I was picking one, I would go pick someone on the Clowney end, because while Rasheem Green shows a ton of promise and is a guy that I think we could count on as a starter, I have no idea if Collier isn't going to be able to do it. And if Collier flames out again this year, who do you have behind him?
So last year we saw Clowney paired with Ansah and whoever else was available on the other side to take some pressure off Clowney. Now you've got a whole list of guys with upside and potential. Mayo has proven, but he's a rotation piece. But you've got Darrell Taylor in the draft. You've got Robinson. You've got Irvin. How does that all massage together?
It's such a better balance, because Ansah was it was a failure. It was a complete bust as a signing. I know it was one of those things where they were hoping he could return to when he was a Pro Bowler before the injury. He never did. And so to get, they got nothing out of that other spot. And then,
right.
they kind of did occasionally once they made the switch and brought Keem Griffin up from linebacker.
Exactly. Right.
So he could get pressure, but it was never consistent pressure, because there would be one play where he gets completely washed out, and then it's like he wasn't even in there. And then the next play he would actually get around the edge, or get up field and spin inside and get some pressure. So it was really inconsistent pressure for him. But at least it was something that they weren't getting anything from Ansah.
Well, if I was Clowney, I would take a look at this situation now, with all that help on the other side that we didn't have last year, plus the back end stuff. And this defense and you add him into it. For me, I would be thinking this would be his best Super Bowl opportunity, as well as joining a group that would clearly give him personally the opportunity to do more this year.
Yeah, and to really show statistically how dominant he can be. Exactly. Because you're going to have an extra, half a second to get to the quarterback and actually get the sack rather than just the pressure, because the back end is good. You're going to have an opportunity to get upfield for tackles for loss against the run, because the linebackers are going to be, you can't double team the linemen as much, because you have to get you have to release and get upfield on the linebackers and put a body on them, or they're going to get into the backfield. So there's going to be situations for him to make plays because of the talent around him. that wasn't always there last year. And so therefore, statistically, he didn't have a stellar year, even though if you watch the tape, he was extremely impactful. But I think he could be just as impactful this year and statistically better and make the case that he deserves the big money that he thought he was going to get this offseason.
I think even just Benson Mayowa, people are just kind of throwing his name around or whatever, right? But just with 30% of the defensive snaps in his last 2 years, he's got 16 tackles for loss, 41 solo tackles, 11 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 18 quarterback hurries, 10 quarterback hits, 12.4% pressure rank, which ranks 20th overall for defensive ends. So a guy like Benson Mayowa and you pair that with Darrell Taylor with all the upside and promise there, that position right there could really produce for the Seahawks, especially if you add Clowney on the other side.
Mayowa, part of his success is that he was a rotational guy. That he'd come in when you knew the other team was passing, you brought Mayowa in, and so he got an opportunity. He didn't have to read the run and those kind of stuff. They allowed him to just pin his ears back and go. And that fits his body type and his play style and everything really well. I'd like to see the Seahawks to be able to do something similar with him.
Do you think that means that Darrell Taylor starts and plays the run, defends the run more to begin with?
Yeah, and so in running situations, you see more of Taylor, and passing
because Darrell Taylor, by the way, defends the run amazingly well for a Leo guy.
Yeah, his college tape as far as a run defender was really good. His college tape as a pass rusher was good. He just needs to develop a counter move to keep the offensive tackles honest. But even that, I mean, you can do that in an off season, so we'll see where he's at. But I could see him start and play the early downs, and then Mayowa come in and play the later downs type of situation, because I think that takes advantage of Mayowa's skill set better and allows him to just be himself and be good at what he does. So it's basically a situation where, who is it an upgrade to go from Keem Griffin to Benson Mayowa as that rotational pass rusher on the Leo side?
Absolutely
it is. Yeah. I mean, Keem was playing out of position. He's a linebacker. He's a weak side linebacker, or possibly a strong safety by trait. And he's coming up playing defensive end. He was way undersized and playing out of position and just trying to use his athleticism to make an impact, and was able to a little bit. But Mayowa he was in Seattle his rookie year, and so we kind of know who he is. But he has developed even since then, during his time with Oakland, into a competent pass rusher who's technically good. He uses hands well. He's got multiple moves to get past the offensive tackle and into the backfield. He closes well. He reads quarterback movements well, so he doesn't rush to the wrong spot because the quarterback, slid type of situation. He's a very competent pass rusher. I think that it is a definite upgrade there. And so then it's like, okay, well, who takes the ANSA snaps and is automatically an upgrade just because he's got a working body? And I do think it's I think it's going to be Darrell Taylor. And honestly, it doesn't matter if there's rookie mistakes or growing pains there. He will still be better because Ansah was
agree.
just...
Ansah gave you one game all year where he really kind of showed out a little bit. What do you do with the guy like Irvin? If you've got Mayowa taking snaps, Taylor taking snaps, if Clowney comes back, and then you've got Green over on the other side as well, with Collier needing snaps, and then the Brooks is taking snaps at linebacker, and Irvin could be the odd guy out. What does his contract look like?
His contract is not cuttable. He's here for the year. And I mean, it is every contract is cuttable, but he is not. They're paying. Didn't he get
$5 million guaranteed or something like that?
Yeah, they're going to pay him whether he's on the team or not, is what I'm saying. And so they're almost certainly going to keep him. And then it's just a matter of getting him some playing time. And it's one of those things where, injuries will come up and he'll get to play, or maybe he wins.
You swap out Rasheem Green and Clowney in there and set him in passing downs. I mean, Clowney proved last year that he's never really been a sack guy. Mm-hmm. And maybe and clear, third and long situations, that's where you throw Irvin in there.
Yeah. And so you could set up a NASCAR package where you have, you have Robinson or Taylor or Mayo on the one side. You bring Irvin up on the other side, and then on the inside you roll with
Reed and Green,
or Green and Clowney, if you have a situation like that. So, and you just set up a NASCAR package where you've got 4 guys that can get to the quarterback quickly. And you dare the other team in that situation to audible into a run on 3rd and 10 because you've got 4 pass rushers.
I agree that Clowney, one of Clowney or Griffin would make this team, would complete the team, where we've got so many options from all over the place on all 3 depths of the field, that teams will have a very difficult time moving the ball against the Seahawks.
The reason why I said Clowney over Griffin is because if you bring Griffin is Leo's side. So he is now over there. You've got Mayoa, you've got Taylor, you've got Robinson, you've got Irvin, and now you've got Griffin. You got 5 guys on that side. And on the other side, you've got Green and Collier.
I do think that Clowney gives you just a tick of an upgrade. A, that's that reason. And B, he defends the run better. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have a struggle with that as a team this year.
If they bring in Griffin, what I wonder is if we will see a little bit of a scheme change and run a little less with that under front. So where you have the strong side and the weak side, a 5-tech and a 7-9-tech side, and they run more a little straight up and shift everyone over. So you've got 2 7s and 2 guys that line up directly over a guard, and just to get more body, get your best 4 on the field there. It's different as far as your gap assignments and all of that, but it is something that I could see the team doing.
So what are you looking forward to most this week from Seahawks practice?
Oh man. I want to see guys get out there and play and run. And I want to see, I really want to see Will Disley run and show that he can cut and move and that his leg's healthy and that his flexibility is back. And if all those things are true, man, I'm so excited for football.
You know what and this is going to sound weird, but you know what I'm looking forward to the most? I'm just looking forward to laughter and smiles and happiness, not only from the commentators, but from the players, and high fives, and Pete Carroll smiling out there, chewing his freaking gum. I mean, come on, give me something to smile about. That's what I'm looking forward to.
And yep.
Hey, I'm old enough to be wearing ugly white shoes on occasion. I'll have you know.
Yeah, but it might be on occasion, but Pete wears them all the time. They're kind of a trademark, though. Like at this point, I think I remember him saying that, people have talked to him about him. He's like, everyone knows, like, you see the shoes, it's me. And he's just going to roll with it. And I'm like, you know what, that's knowing who you are and just being yourself. And I can appreciate that.
Oh, man. So it's going to be great. So reminder, Seahawks.com starting tomorrow I don't know what time they start practice. I didn't get that far, but it's streaming tomorrow. So you got to check it out. We will be, for sure. We'll be talking about what we see next week, obviously. Yeah, great show, Keith. Good conversation. We talked a lot about the secondary. We got into other aspects of the defense, kind of how it all fit together. So fun talk. Next week, we'll come back and do it again. Do you have any final words before we head out of here?
No, just please, everyone, be safe with the COVID stuff, both on Seahawks in the bubble and fans out there. We, as a nation, we need to get behind this and get this figured out so that way we can have a good fall and kind of just move on. So please be safe. Please take care of yourself. Take care of your family.
I know my 14-year-old started high school yesterday, and it's online. It's weird because he's going to school. In fact, we're not doing the local district high school online version. We decided to go with an online school that had been around for a little while, that kind of has all the bugs worked out, knows what they're doing, also ties into Arizona State University. So it's an Arizona State University preparatory school, and he can do concurrent college courses and all that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty decent situation. It kind of plays into his learning style anyway. So we feel good about that choice for at least this year. But I definitely want him to be able to go back to school. So anywho, I will talk to you soon, Keith. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at SeahawksPlaybook.com on the website, and you can listen to all the shows and join us next time. And we look forward to being back here next week. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.